So Mel says evening one and all. Bob says hi. James, hi. Hi everyone. Brilliant. There's no activity at the moment in that waiting room, so we'll get going. Hello everyone. Thank you for joining us for this exciting tasting with Balblair. Another trip to the Highlands. I think this is maybe the third in a row we've done a Highland distillery, Lucas. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, we want to hear your comments and questions in the chat. Please do ask us about tasting notes and anything to do with the history of the distillery. I was reading, Lucas, that it's built on a Pictish gathering site, so maybe that could be a question someone asks at some point. But anyway, that's enough for me. At the end, I'll be giving the 15% discount out, but you can come here to listen to me. You came here to taste whiskey and listen to Lucas. So, Lucas, do you want to introduce yourself and then maybe give us the running order? I suppose it's a bit of an obvious one tonight, but no harm in making sure everyone's familiar about the order we're going in.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you very much, Luke, and thank you everybody for joining us. Good evening. I think we'll get to it as quickly as possible. My name is Lucas Noviak. I'm the brand education manager here at International Beverage Holdings. So we have Balblair, but also a couple of other distilleries. Pulping Distillery is one of ours, so that's probably the one that you're possibly most familiar with. We also have Speyburn, Knockdo Distillery, which makes a knock. And also Balmenic Distillery that doesn't have a single malt on the market, so you may not be as familiar with it as some of the others. But Balblair is obviously that's the pet, that's the little baby, that's the crown jewel, that's the little boutique brand, the smallest single malt brand of the lot by some distance, but also probably the one that consistently retains that status of just super liquid, punching well above its weight in that regard, but remaining something of a hidden gem. So yeah, I've been with the company since 2015. It's a good few years, and I started as a brand ambassador back then. I now look after a small cohort of annoyingly young and good-looking people traveling the world with company credit cards, and I tend to stay put a little bit more, but I still venture out and still have some brand education sort of duties, like tonight, which is pure pleasure, but also occasional trip to North America and Asia predominantly is kind of where I tend to travel to, and I get involved in product development side as well. So for the past 2 years, I've been on what we call the whiskey creation team, which is a sort of a cross-functional team in the business looking at innovation, product development, and the future of all things liquid for international beverage. So I have some limited insight into that side of things as well. Okay, cool. So in terms of the running order, we'll look at Balblair 12, 15, 18, and 21-year-old. I think there's no surprise there. It's what I would kind of think of as the perfect vertical range, as far as our master blender Stuart Harvey would be concerned, and he really kind of, if you look across the brands and across the board, he tends to structure the verticals in this way, where the youngest expression tends to be sort of American oak, ex-bourbon cask led, and displays a lot of the distillery style, and the one in the mid-teens will tend to be kind of the balanced, the really kind of bright one. Then the 18-year-old or thereabout will tend to be the kind of the lavish one that tends to err on the side of the cask. And then into the 20s, that's where the sparks fly and various interesting things happen. So we'll have a look at those. I have some slides to show you as well, if you so wish. I'm reliably informed that it's okay to maybe share the screen and show some photos. I'll get to that as well. But I think so maybe I'll do it now. But I would encourage you, please do feel free to pour your whiskey if you haven't done so yet. Grab the first glass, and we'll start looking at that first dram, which is Balblair 12.
While you're bringing up that slide, Lucas, this is a bit of a digression early on, but I was actually at Speyburn 2 weeks ago, and I must say it's probably the best distillery tour I think I've ever been on. It was phenomenal. Okay. Such an amazing distillery. Yeah.
We opened it to visitors for the first time in May this year for Spirit of Speyside, and it was a bit of a trial. And at that point, it was still a little bit touch and go whether we would actually open it permanently. But we were mobbed. I mean, we sold out all tours within like 4 hours of going up on the website, and we had people kind of just dropping in without tour tickets, and kind of we were swarmed for the entire duration of Spirit of Speyside. So we thought, it's only fair. It's an amazing site, and so you would have been to the drum maltings, and that's
the drum maltings, yeah, it was amazing. But my personal highlight for anyone who hasn't been there is when you go up on the roof and you stand over the worm tub, and you get to put your hand in the water being heated by the stills. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's a really cool site, and it really combines that kind of that very old with with the worm tub condensation as such. It's really kind of a glimpse into distilling history, and then you've got the drum maltings, which are kind of turn of 19th or 20th century technology, which is sort of frozen in time. They left in the 60s and turned the key, and nothing ever changed. So that's a really unique sort of part of the site to see, and it's a huge building as well, and it's amazing that it's been kind of just retained and preserved in the state that it is. But then again, it is actually a very efficient site, and it's a very modern site in some ways as well. So it runs a thermal vapor recompressor on the wash still, and it's a really energy efficient site as well. So it's a cool site to visit. So yeah, go visit Speyburn after you've visited Balblair, of course. That's the focus today. Okay, so Balblair Distillery. Actually, I love this shot, and this is unfortunately cropped quite heavily, so you can't see the full whack of it. But this is my favorite photo of the distillery. If you watched Ken Loach's film Angel Share, right? This is the money shot in the film as well. Although it's shot from the same hill where I think the characters they camp there overnight or whatever the case is. But I think that the layout, kind of the roof line that you see here, the progression of the buildings, and it's actually a roof line that tells the story of the production process, right? Because you've got the kiln right on the right hand side, and then you've got you've actually got the tun room, which is kind of going off perpendicular, but then you've got the still room, and then the filling store, which kind of cascade away from the kiln, and then you see obviously there was the warehousing here, which is all of this, everything actually you can see here, except sort of some of the more modern additions. You can see probably a new roof up on the boiler house. Everything else is late 19th century. So what you can see here was actually built for Alexander Cowan in 1890s, 1894 to 1895. But the history of the distillery, the story of distilling on this site and in the village of Edgerton goes further back. So yeah, but let's have a look at the first dram, and let's just start sniffing and obviously tasting it. So you know what? It's Thursday night. I'm going to help myself as well. So this here is obviously Balblair, aged 12 years. It's all American oak cask. It's a combination of refill ex-bourbon barrels and hogsheads, but also recharred or dechar casks, as we would say. They play a really important role in the combination here. It's about 65% refill and about 35% DCRC casks. They do slightly different things. They perform slightly different roles in this composition. So the refill casks, they tend to lend still quite sweet, quite creamy style. A little bit of that sort of signature vanilla toffee, but they're still a little bit tannic. So they still leach sort of that kind of slight astringency, that structure, that sort of backbone. The holds tends to kind of hold it together, and it holds the sweetness off, and it really kind of helps to balance the dram, make it a little bit more assertive, make it kind of quite grown up. Whereas the rejuvenated casks or the dechar casks, they are slightly different. They're far less tannic. But they tend to lend that kind of caramelized sweetness, and also they're quite rich in vanillin. So they will tend to give a lot of that sort of creamy or fresh vanilla characteristics. So they are slightly different. And the Deacher Reacher casks, they're also very efficient at maturing the spirit. They are very good at removing impurities, not impurities in the sense that there's something wrong, but the sort of immature characteristics, the sort of green characteristics of new make spirit, that we would term them. And also they tend to be very happy, very active in terms of oxidizing the spirit and developing the spirit into its natural fruitiness and tropical character. So
just on that, Lucas, the Deacher Reacher, what's the difference between that and the STR casks that you see a lot these days?
The Deacher Reacher cask, I mean, that technology is 100 years old in Scotland, right? And it's a very, very straightforward process. So the casks are brushed, or they would have been sort of historically brushed. It's a slightly different process now, but in any case, the layer of char is taken off, and the casks are kind of. Sorry, I dropped my. Have I done something to the presentation? Is it back up? My apologies. So the layer of char is sort of brushed off, and then the casks are typically, they can be retoasted, and they're certainly recharred. So there's a couple of things happening here. First of all, the layer of spent char and spent wood is sort of taken off. And second of all, we're obviously reheating the cask, so we're kind of the heat processing of the cask is reapplied. So whatever congeners are present in cask and form extract for the spirit to take on, which are a product of heat degradation of polymers in oak. Essentially, they are going to be topped up. And obviously there's a group of congeners which are product of heat degradation of oak, but there is a whole kind of subgroup of congeners which are not related to the heat treatment of the cask. So once those are kind of washed out of the wood, they're gone. So kind of tannins would be kind of the prime suspect in that group, and then your lactones kind of fall under that of the big sort of famous congeners. And then on the side of flavors which are topped up in charring, we're obviously looking at oak sugars being caramelized, but we're also looking at various processes which will lead to, for example, lignin being degraded into an acid and then further into vanillin. So you've got essentially that's the purpose. And in terms of the kind of the scraped casks, as you say, I think there is a degree of overlap between the two processes. We're looking at kind of texturing the inside of the cask as well. But to be perfectly honest, I'm probably not the right person to kind of speak to those at any length. I'm aware of them. We are running some trials, but we don't actually have a lot of sort of first-hand experience with those. So in terms of what output they're kind of likely to generate, what is the exact specific difference as a bottom line? I know I have secondhand knowledge of it, but in terms of what it means for Balblair, what it means for us, it's kind of too early to tell in a way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, quite the detailed answer. So thanks for going into that. Got some great tasting notes coming in. Bob says nice waxy nose, tasting apples and cooked pears, honey sweetness, stunning 12-year-old, tiny touch of spice on the finish. Kirsty says smells very light citrus, orchard fruit, but nice vanilla on the palate. And then we have James said this is very refreshing, light and crisp, ending with a citrusy toffee apple. There's also a question there from Kirsty, but we'll come to it in a second, maybe after we finish talking about the 12-year-old. It is quite the kind of citrusy, refreshing whiskey.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, these are spot on. I think when the spirit runs off the still, it already is citrusy and it already is very fruity and it's slightly perfumed. When we assess the new make spirit, when we look at new make spirit for Balblair, these are some of the core characteristics that we're looking for. So we're definitely looking for kind of this, citrus sort of, we call it sort of oily citrus, or that kind of lemon peel style citrusy note. We're looking for apricot, which is sort of a classic sort of Balblair new make characteristic, and then we're looking for that kind of slightly darker underpinning. So we'll be looking for a little bit of that sort of walnut shell, a little bit of that kind of leathery undertone. You definitely want to see that. So after 12 years, in the combination of these American oak casks, what you're getting is I think a very very honest, very sort of direct representation of the distillery style.
No, very good.
Yeah.
And this is £49. So obviously with the, I had it in front of me a second ago, but with the 15% discount, that I think leaves it around 42.
Yeah,
something like that. Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah. So I didn't mention the spec. So it's presented at 46%. It will take water well, and it's natural color, as you can probably tell from this sort of pale golden kind of straw color, and it's non-chill filtered also, right? There's sort of all sorts of kind of complications and problems and misconceptions and sort of various myths and various things sort of related to that. But I think the bottom line is that probably the top tier sort of whiskey drinkers, the top tier enthusiasts, tend to pay attention to it and tend to prefer spirit to be non-chill filtered. You will hopefully be familiar with the process. So it's essentially a process. It's a filtration process where you filter the spirit at low temperature, decreased temperature, in order to remove a proportion of the fatty acid esters, which malt spirit is naturally rich in. But they're soluble in obviously ethanol solution, but poorly soluble in water. So as you change the proportion of water to ethyl alcohol, you're actually decreasing the efficiency of the solvent towards fatty acid ester. So depending on specific fatty acid ester content in particular malt whiskey, because that will vary from distillery to distillery as well, you may be able to get away with kind of 44-45%, but inevitably there comes a point where if you drop the alcohol content too low, those fatty acid esters will start coming out of solution and they'll kind of precipitate into the spirit, which is to say they'll form a haze, right? So even with this whiskey, obviously, if you drop the temperature, if you add water to it, kind of, and really let it kind of sit and integrate, it will throw that sort of slight haze. It's quite interesting. Not a week passes, I think, that we don't get a message on social media or through like a contact form or something where a consumer will say, well, I put my whiskey in the freezer for a week or something, and there's now kind of white flakes floating, inside the bottle, and we go like, yeah, that's a chill haze, but you managed to create flock, which is not easy, Yeah, so obviously non-chill filtered across the range, and everything that we're tasting tonight is at the same spec, which is 46, and non-chill filtered, natural colors.
Marvelous. No, that's interesting. I don't know why you'd put the whiskey in the freezer for 2 weeks, but there you go.
Yeah.
Mac says, or Ali Mac says, they did a tour last year, loved it. Just as we were moving on from the 12, the Kirsty had a question there about the Pictish symbol that's on the bottle, and is there as there's a debate around what it means, she says, what's the official distillery line as to the meaning of the symbol?
Yeah, that's very good. So I just flick to the next slide because it shows it better. So we do have a Pictish standing stone. It's not quite on site, but it's a couple of 100 yards from kind of the boundary of the site. It's in the field. Also, only in Scotland do you have a sort of a grade 2 standing Pictish stone, which is thousands of years old, and it's just got a little kind of wooden fence around it so that cows don't rub against it. Right? That's the sort of the only thing protecting it, just sitting there.
Are we suggesting we should go up and steal it?
Well, we have the running joke is that we take all the album cover photographs next to the stone, because people will tend to kind of like crouch down, or people tend to feel that they need to do something with their bodies when they're being photographed with something which is kind of this, right? Like, it's just the magic of the place. People can't just kind of stand up. They will have people like crouching down or kind of like folding their arms, and they're always great photos. They look like album covers. But yeah. So
you're saying that the picture stone is a good spot for pics.
Actually, I think Picture Stone is also a good band name. We should take this offline. But what it says is it's a standing stone which has been at a later time sort of in inverted commas vandalized, or kind of not people who raised it, but people kind of who were sort of part of this area and part of this community at a later time. They sort of engraved it, and one of the engravings depicts this symbol, which is kind of blown up here in this slide, so you can see it better. But that's essentially the symbol that's carved into the stone. In terms of meaning, I think the brand line, or sort of the line that we've heard from somebody, and we quite like it, is sort of symbolizes passage of time. You've got the sun possibly kind of setting or rising, reflecting in the waters of Dornoch. So obviously anything that's to do with passage of time obviously plays very nicely to our brand story, and kind of makes that nice kind of narrative loop, if you like. But also a good friend of mine from high school, she happens to be a qualified archaeologist, and she reliably informs me that while we may as well be excused for thinking that there's actually no evidence to the effect, she says it may literally mean anything, but it probably means passage of time or something to the effect,
Yeah. No, very good. Maybe it's a map to buried treasure. Kirsty says not the each usage. I don't know what was that? I was hoping maybe you did, but
sorry, I didn't quite catch it.
So Kirsty said not the each usage.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
No.
There you go.
No.
Well, we got some more taste notes in there. Bob says last visited in 2019, wonderful place, water spirit. So Ishka usage maybe.
We're deep into the pun territory, I'll flick through some history or heritage slides. I'm not sure if you kind of particularly want me to go into detail. You're probably quite keen to jump into the next dram, so I'll jog through these, right? But just a couple of kind of key moments for us. The distillery was licensed in 1790, which makes it one of the oldest sort of licensed distilleries in Scotland, certainly the oldest working licensed distillery in the Northern Highlands. But we have records of distilling on site going back to the 1740s. I think 1747 is the first time that we can, with some certainty, say that there's absolutely no reason why this barley growing farm would have been buying barley, right? For example, so we know there was distilling going further back. It was attached to a farming operation. So Balblair Farm in Edgerton, part of the Balnagowan estate, and this man here is actually not the founder. This is not John Ross. This is his son, Alexander Ross. As you can probably kind of, if you know the history of photography, you would have figured out that this is kind of way too early to have a photograph of anybody. But it was operated by the Ross family for about 100 years, right, legally. So from 1790 to about 1890, it was operated by the Rosses. So they were kind of the tenants. They had the tenancy of the farm. The Balnagowan estate still exists. Balblair Farm and the village of Edgerton is no longer part of it. But the estate is still kind of quite extensive, and it's not far. It's actually owned by Mohammed Al Fayed, right? So W. Al Fayed's father. Sometimes see his helicopter kind of going back and forth. Right, a new distillery. So the distillery actually moved from the farm buildings into purpose-built site in the 1890s, and this was done for the Cowan family. So for people who came after the Rosses, this is kind of probably a level of detail I'm not sure. So it operated until 1911, when it was mothballed for the first time, and then it kind of went through a period of being sort of open intermittently. By the time World War II started, we know there was no stock left at the distillery, which is quite interesting, even though it sort of operated on and off in those years. But it definitely hit on hard times in 1911, and it never quite sort of picked itself up properly until after the war. In fact, there were Norwegian troops stationed at the distillery almost kind of throughout World War II. They were training in Scotland. There was even a visit from Norwegian royalty at that time to sort of inspect the troops, which we have some marvelous photography from. But the man who sort of raised the distillery from its slumber post-war was Bertie Cummings. If you're a whiskey historian, if you're interested in whiskey history, you've probably heard of the man. He restarted a number of distilleries in Scotland after the war. Was a very clever man with also a big heart for Scottish distilling. So sort of, and obviously a little bit of capital to play with. He was a solicitor from Banff, but obviously with a little bit of investment potential. So he restarted a few distilleries, among them Balblair Distillery, which he bought in 1948 and started filling the following year. And here you see one of the early casks being filled. Bertie Cummings is the second from the left here. Yeah, you can see some of the warehouses being added in the 60s. Obviously, the old 1890s warehouses are sort of slate roof, and all these warehouses sort of going all the way back. Very bright in color, covered in corrugated steel. You can see those are actually brick construction. They are dunnage warehouses, but brick construction, and covered with sheet. Fast forward to the 70s. Now this has to be one of my favorite distillery team photos of all time. You can keep sort of unpacking this photo, and you unpack, and then you always find something cool and something new. But I'll draw your attention to the obviously quite interesting looking young man in the middle of the photo. So the trousers are very sort of very appropriate for the period. I think this was his second or third day on the job. So imagine that as well, having the cojones to go, you're brand new, you're the newest operator, right? And having the cojones to go, yeah, we're having a team photo. I'm going to jump in that butt, I'm going to sit on it. And actually, if you fast forward to kind of a present-ish day team, that's Martin MacDonald on the far right-hand side, the gentleman with his boiler suit kind of zipped open. That's the young man who was sitting in that sherry butt. Obviously 40 years later, and the boss John MacDonald in the middle. They're all Rosses or MacDonalds. Well, not quite all of them Normanism, but out of, I think, 8 operators, something like 5 of them have the surname Ross, which is not uncommon in Ross-shire, I guess. Oh, here's my prompt, not to chat too much, but to encourage you to pour the next dram. So Balblair 15. If you don't like this, don't tell me, because it's entirely sort of one of our favorite drams, one of our absolute pets, and we're fiercely proud of it. What we do is sort of in mid-teens, right? This will change in late teens as we go on. Well, what we do for mid-teens is we tend to create whiskey that we want to drink. We don't make this with a specific sort of consumer in mind, if you like. This is a dram that we make for ourselves. This is kind of almost kind of showing off. This is the sort of the way that we would say to other distillers, look, this is our maturation skill. This is how we balance Balblair. This is how we balance our dram. In this case, it's filled initially into refill American oak ex-bourbon hogsheads, no barrels actually involved here. and then it's re-racked or refilled into first fill Spanish oak butts, which are seasoned for us with Oloroso sherry. Now those casks are quite interesting in themselves. What's happening here is we're obviously going to take that initial period of 12, 13 years in American oak to really let the spirit develop and really let it develop that kind of that sheen, that beautiful sort of tropical fruitiness that we saw in a 12-year-old, and really take that initial tropical perfume and kind of turn it quite fleshy and turn it really quite sort of ripe and sweet. What we then want to see on top of that complexity is we want to see a little bit of darkness, just a little bit of that sort of dessert, sort of bitter sweetness, and a little bit of dried fruit, which just complicates things, right? It just adds breadth to the ensemble. So we're going to see this developed, fruity, tropical, bright, perfumed, quite clean sort of top end, and then we're going to see that incredible sort of complexity in the middle that really comes in, transforms over time, takes a small drop of water very well, and actually transforms and really develops in the bottle as well. I actually have a bottle here on my desk which has been open probably for the best part of a year or so, and and actually I kind of watch it over time as it tends to develop and transform. So a stunning dram. We look at, so in terms of balancing maturation, right? We'll look at sort of three parts of it, three legs of it. One is something which is quite obvious, and we tend to kind of that's a shorthand. We tend to kind of jump to that mentally when we think about maturation, and that's sort of extraction, right? So that's taking flavor, sweetness, body on from the cask, and also color. The second thing that we stand on is actually losing content. So evaporation to atmosphere due to angel share, but also what comes into the cask is exchange with the environment. The casks do take on quite a lot of water, which is not something which is sort of very well researched, or the knowledge of this is not formalized, but any distiller who works in the far north and with dunnage warehousing systems knows this perfectly well. The casks actually do take on significant water content over winter months, particularly sort of in early spring, and most casks will sort of experience layering in springtime. So it's quite an interesting process. But obviously you're losing part of the content to evaporation, and you're taking on a little bit of water content in the annual cycle as well. So that's the second part of it, and the third part of it is just oxidation, development of flavor in the cask. We're going to see those sort of estery notes, those beautiful kind of tropical fruity notes continue to develop throughout the maturation cycle. So actually, I'm yet to see a cask of very old Balblair that would actually cease to develop that end of things. It goes into sort of overripe fruit, and then it goes into sort of decomposing kind of sort of pineapple kind of shells or clippings, and it goes into sort of rancio, that kind of very old cognac, kind of fruity non-fruity layer, well into its 40s and 50s. It will continue to develop that way. So in part this is due to maturation in dunnage warehouses, where you have open earthen floors. Obviously the casks are underside, they're all very close to the ground, and because of the construction of the warehouse, because of the open floor, and because of the location, and obviously in the far north of Scotland, there's a very small temperature amplitude inside those warehouses throughout the year. So the thermal mass of the liquid itself helps to regulate that, and then the open soil, the open ground helps to regulate humidity. So humidity and temperature will stay at a very, very kind of constant level throughout the year, which also helps to maintain that development, that oxidation curve well into sort of advanced age. So what we're looking at here with the sorry for this kind of slightly long explanation, but what we're trying to sort of do with the 15 here is to really sort of make sure that it stands on all three legs in almost sort of equal measure. So we want to see the character of the spirit, and we want to see the extract from the cask. So we want the cask to speak as well. Hence the refilling into the sherry cask to really kind of complicate that aspect of things. But we want to see that natural development also. So that's kind of my the way that I tend to think about the 15-year-old.
No, very good. It's yeah, very detailed and passionate explanation, Lucas. But some great tasting notes in there. Vicky says, I love the Balblair 15. The sherry finish is not too overpowering, but you know it's there. Bob says the 15-year-old is the wife's current favorite. Dried fruit and dark chocolate, ginger nuts, rich finish, yum. Vicky says licorice and dark chocolate on the palate with a lovely tropical note that comes through in the finish alongside a warm leather note. A good step up from the 12, says Ali. Caramac on the nose, which, if you're referring to the chocolate bar, Jamie, I think I read was discontinued recently, which is a shame. It's gone for good. Only about a couple of weeks ago. Bob says very oily legs, Moorish for sure. Chilies in pear drops, I think is an excellent tasting note from Jamie, because it does have that kind of fruitiness in there, and then there is that kind of almost like dried chili spice on the finish. In some regards, kind of that just lingers there. It's
yeah, I get it 100%. I agree with that, and I tend not to bring it up, but it does actually circle through. We hear that in the lab, right, quite a lot when we discuss it, because I think there's a danger in bringing up that particular tasting note in consumer tastings or trade tastings, because you say chili and people think hot or painful, right? But actually, chilies, as in chili peppers, as in the fruit of the chili plant, has a beautiful kind of very pronounced, sharp, fruity character, right? It's actually more acidic and sharp than anything else. If you think about the flavor itself, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, no, it's you're right, and it's an excellent tasting note. James says this is a great little journey of taste, very balanced. It's like that Willy Wonka chewing gum from the film, like a meal in your mouth. Just don't blow up like a blueberry or a bottle of whiskey at the end.
Yeah, that ship has sailed. I already look like that bottle, you know.
I think you're not the only one on this call in that regard, Lucas, including myself. Brilliant. I'm conscious that people actually might be already because we I think some people started into it just before we did, so we maybe not move on the dram, but if you've got another slide, it might be a good time to move on to the next bit.
Yeah,
or is the next plan to go straight into the 18? It's up to yourself.
We can certainly go straight to the 18, and feel free to compare them side by side. Start nosing and tasting the 18. It's your whiskey, you know. God damn it! Don't let anybody tell you what to do. I'll flick.
You're smart. You'll have bought two of these tasting packs. You know, isn't that right, Lucas?
Yeah, that's it. I'll flick through the production slides because I've got a few of those as well. I'll try not to linger on these. Maybe just kind of let's see if I can point out something that's kind of a little bit different or interesting in terms of the water source. The Red Burn. It runs open ditch, right? So it's a typical kind of Scottish surface water, which is very, very soft. It has incredibly low minerality. So very soft water, which is actually not great for mashing, you know. If you ask a brewer, you know, they prefer harder water, obviously, for extraction. But soft water is valued by certain malt distillers for its apparent, you know, impact on the organoleptic properties of the finished product, which is actually something of a you know, it's debated. It's not something that's been kind of laid to rest by any means. Barley, I think I mean this slide is a few years old. I mean, Concerto and Laureate definitely still in the picture. Laureate much more so in the last couple of years. You know, Concerto Laureate blend was also something that we've done. We've matched quite a lot of Sassy last year and some this year. What I would say about barley varieties is they tend to fluctuate much more than they used to, and that's a good thing, right? So when you hear distillers kind of switching from one variety to the other, playing with brewing varieties, playing with, you know, maybe kind of, you know, varieties that would have been used traditionally for grain distilling, but are now kind of available in sort of large kernel format. All of these things are good for all of us because it means there are more varieties available. More varieties just mean better performance, because you're not relying on one or two varieties, as was so often the case historically, right? So this will fluctuate, and quite a lot of sassy mashed recently, but certainly the 12-year-old tasting would have been kind of the front end of the concerto. But we mashed Octavia, we mashed Propino at some point, so we've mashed a few different varieties. But it's all Scottish barley that's being processed. I'm informed reliably by the maltster that all comes from about a 40-mile radius of the distillery, because we take barley from Baird's Maltings, and actually a lot of their malt comes from, or a lot of their barley for processing into malt comes from the Black Isles. It comes from, sort of next door to us. Milling, traditional Portuguese mill. I don't think there's too much to say about it. It was put in the 1980s, I think, and it was a second-hand mill at that point. The mill is probably close to 100 years old. There you go. The mashing cycle, it's a steel tun, near enough 4.5 tons. As you can see, it's a deep bed. So 4.5 meter diameter is quite narrow for this sort of tonnage. So deep bed just means slow drainage. We don't rake it, or we don't rake it aggressively. There's sort of a few turns as you're mashing in, and then really the rakes are stopped, and as you're sparging, you're really kind of letting hydrostatic pressure take effect and really filter through the mash bed. So that results in very clear wort. So we sometimes get questions about the kind of the tropical character. How do you shape that? And actually there isn't a simple answer, right? Because every stage of the process will play a part. So as early as milling process, we're kind of setting everything up towards that very, very clear wort, quite a long and violent fermentation, so it kind of lifts off quite violently, and then the distillation process itself obviously is sort of set up. It's geared in a way that captures the high end very, very efficiently. You can see Martin here sticking something inside. I'm sure the photographer made him do it, but I don't think it has any purpose, any process purpose whatsoever. Fermentation here, 6 Douglas fir wooden washbacks, so it doesn't get more traditional than this, right? 1 mash tun, 6 wooden washbacks, and 1 pair of stills. The time listed here is 60 hours, but I think if you're around distilleries long enough, you'll soon realize that fermentation time is one of the more kind of flexible aspects of the process, and it will tend to be dialed up and down depending on requirements. If not so much spirit is required in a particular year, the distillers may be able to extend the fermentation times, which they generally like to do. You will tend to drive better yield, better efficiency if you let fermentations run over the kind of stipulated, whatever the yeast people tell you, 48, 50, 52 hours. But if you let it run longer, you will see more secondary conversion in washback, and you'll actually see a little bit more efficiency. But also you're improving flavor at the top end, so you're driving more fruity, again, more tropical flavor out of these longer fermentations. I've certainly seen standard fermentations kind of stretch to 65 hours and beyond at Balblair. And they also do have weekend fermentations, right? So they, so I think they work 12 days on, 2 days off. So they will have those long weekend fermentations, which are kind of which are filled on Thursdays and are not kind of dumped until like Sunday night shifts. They're 100-hour plus fermentations as well.
So you're not so what's the, how many days a week do you operate? Sorry.
So this will also change depending on particular requirements of the business. I think one of the things, hopefully I'm not revealing sort of any sensitive secrets here, but one of the things will be kind of availability of wood, right, like for purposes, right, but also sort of external customers and kind of bulk orders and everything else. So some months or some years you may be required to sort of push pedal to the metal and try and extend that. And then the site may well operate 24/7. But more typically, they'll get kind of every other weekend off, which is good as well from kind of maintenance and sort of for other reasons as well, staffing and everything else. Yeah, another nice shot of the washbacks here. I mean, they're amazing things. Distillation here. One pair of stills, as I said. I wonder if there's a better photo. Yeah, there is a better photo of these stills. So you can see the one that's closer to us is the wash still, and the one that's further away is the spirit still. You can see they are sort of quite plump, onion shaped, I think is fair to say. They're not the tallest stills in the industry by any stretch. Our next door neighbors are 6 miles away. I don't know if you've heard of this little distillery, what are they called? Glenmorangie. They have much taller stills. Also a completely different site, right? It's a kind of point of interest, but Glenmorangie, a few miles literally down the road. Our distillery manager, John McDonald, actually started his distilling career at Glenmo. So very much kind of closely knit distilleries and communities. But they have these tall stills. They also have well water, which is quite hard, sort of, well, it's hard by Scottish standards, slightly higher minerality water. Whereas we have this sort of very soft water, very short still, and actually in the end they produce kind of significantly different styles of spirit. But what you have here is these kind of quite short squat stills, descending line arms, and they are paired with very efficient shell and tube condensers, which were put in 1981. There used to be actually, point of interest, there used to be 3 stills at Balblair. So I used to run one of those kind of unbalanced, strange kind of, 2-point whatever distillations. This is kind of this is really kind of pre anybody who works on site, because this is like pre 1950s. But when I first started going to Balblair around 2010, the third still was still on site, and it was a riveted still, and it was an amazing thing. But eventually it was taken away for sites, so people who made it, and it's actually on display outside their plant in Rothes, in the little car park which is next to the station hotel. So if you're ever sort of going past Rothes and you see this random riveted copper still filled with concrete sitting in the car park, that's the third Balblair still, and it's a very old still. And the reason why Richard got it from us is I think his grandfather made it, right? Personally, so it's it's a small industry. It's a small.
They should make a documentary about that still and how they made it, because I'm sure it'd be riveting.
Yeah. Oh, this tasting will go down in we need to send you to a penitentiary.
Melvin says I'm getting pineapple, hazelnuts, and creamy lemon from the 15-year-olds, but a lot of people have moved on to the 18, Lucas. So the still chat is brilliant. And but I was just kind of conscious that a lot of people are sipping away at the 18. So maybe talk about that for a second, because Sean says deeply spicy and warming, lovely with the gale blowing outside. Jeff says 18 is a massive step up from the 12 and 15, but you can still tell it's from the same family. Steadily growing, darker in color. It's color from the wood. Is color from the wood or sherry? Which is a good question. Which maybe come to in a second. A lovely creamy, almost white chocolate sweetness comes through with the 18. Apricot really comes through on the palate with a nice toasted oak on the finish. The 18 noses like a well-worn leather chair, comforting and warming. Lots of dried fruit and vanilla, custard cream, cinnamon, nutmeg, spice. Gorgeous after dinner dram, my favorite so far. And this is from what I remember on my visit. It's a very tight site inside the still house, which means it must have been even tighter when there was 3 stills there. It says, just joined late, sorry. I enjoy Balblair in general, but if any of the first 2 are near as good as the 18-year-old, I'm in for a treat later. So sweet on the nose, toffee caramel, lovely on the palate too. Neil, it's a bit like the Star Wars, the prequels are never as good, but they are still lovely drams. Excellent. Any thoughts on those taste notes, Lucas?
I think they're amazing, actually. I mean, we always say there are no like wrong tasting notes, right? But every now and then you hear people say something and go like, oh, I'm not too sure, you know. I'm not getting that, but actually these notes are all spot on, and I think there is a common thread sort of running through them, which is that dark sort of unrefined sweetness, caramelized sweetness, spiciness, you know, dried fruitiness, chocolate, and all of these things are absolutely spot on.
On James's question about the color, because I still have some of the 15 here, and there's a huge, for 3 years, there's a massive color jump. Could you maybe talk a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So the sherry cask, which is kind of the shorthand, right? But effectively, well, they're Spanish oak bots, right? We take them from Jose Miguel Martin, which is a well-known supplier. I think for some people will kind of, you know, it will ring familiar for some of you. You know, certainly Glenfarclas, I've used them. They love them. Macallan, I've used them for decades. You know, they've tried to buy them on a number of occasions. They're their favorite casks as well. They don't make a lot of them, but they make them to incredible quality. So Miguel, he buys wood in as you do with Spanish oak from Galicia region. It's quarter sawned and it's processed into these kind of planks and dried in Jerez, or actually just outside of Jerez, because it's effectively it's near Huelva. So it's outside of Jerez Triangle in a place called Boyos Pardo Contado, where the main facility is. And then they are then after a year and a half drying, never over 2 summer seasons. So it only encompasses 1 summer. They are then obviously coopered, raised into casks. There's kind of a number of problems here along the way. You know, the wood itself, the supply is very limited. The Spanish Environmental Protection Agency very rightly is sort of you know, protecting the Galicia sort of oak groves from sort of over harvesting. So the overall volume of oak in Spain has been growing, which is a great thing. But that also means there's a lot more pressure on the supply that exists, which means that, you know, it's getting more and more expensive every year. Whatever is sort of harvested, it's quite finicky. It's quite kind of wide grain. You know, tends to be quite twisted. It's relatively kind of fast growing. So it grows throughout the year as well, and that kind of makes it quite finicky for coopering. It's not as pliable as American oak, so you get these kind of breakages. It's very prone to having areas of high porosity as well, which are only revealed post drying. They're actually sort of areas of wood which become quite sort of grayish post drying, which mean the amount of wood that's sort of discarded post drying is about 25% compared to about 1.5%, I think, American oak. If I'm not kind of mistaken. So what happens here is we've got this expensive wood which is raised into these casks and then seasoned with sherry wine. It's got nothing to do with sherry making process, right? That's kind of worth remembering. It never really did, right?
Yeah.
Even when sherry was a big thing, and even when there was a lot more sherry kind of in wood than whiskey, even then the casks that were typically used in Scotland were, I mean, the butts.
They're transportation casks, aren't
correct, they? Yeah, absolutely. So the way they
most bodegas, their Solero system would have actually, even going back a couple 100 years, would have been often North American oak, even, you know, and the transportation casks were European oak. There's the idea that we're taking the Solero casks into whiskey making has never been true.
Never been true, no. And even if you, I spoke to people from Jose Estevez recently, and I think they said they stopped putting Spanish oak effectively into the system in like 1910s. So do you know what I mean? So there's
the whole point of the system is that you only replace a cask when it's on its last legs, when you absolutely have to. But there just wouldn't be enough turnover and churn for them to supply what we need.
They're built to slightly different spec. If you look at the casks, they're actually sitting in criaderas in bodegas. they are kind of they're slightly different construction, right? So the casks that we have in Scotland, they have this kind of quite pronounced sort of quite pronounced belly, quite kind of sharp belly in the middle. And they're kind of very thick stave. They're transportation casks. They're casks that were designed to be rolled, you know, up ramps and down ramps and sit on decks and do all of this kind of strenuous kind of mechanical work. Whereas the casks that sit in Creatairs they are not designed to do that at all, right? They're kind of a little bit more kind of elegant, you know, kind of curvy looking. So yeah, absolutely. Look, you're 100% correct. So when you know, and actually the process of sort of replacing these transportation casks with casks that were actually seasoned to order goes well, like further back than we tend to think of it as kind of 1980s. You know, pesky European Union stopped us from importing sherry in wood. Therefore, we had to start ordering these seasoned casks. But actually by 1980s, you know, those transportation casks were never kind of fulfilling that demand to begin with. So it's quite a complicated landscape. But essentially, the casks that are made for us today are replicas of those transportation casks going kind of into, you know, the first half of the 20th century and beyond into 19th century indeed. They're raised for us from Spanish oak. They can also be made very efficiently from American oak, and we certainly fill butts made from American oak or with a proportion of American oak staves in them. But for a high-end single malt product, what we're using here is 100% Spanish oak butts. And it's really the wood. I mean, this is us talking around somebody's question for a long time, right? But it's essentially the wood that gives majority of the color. So you will know that it's the previous fill can actually steer the hue a little bit, right? So it can steer it kind of to, you know those port pipes that give you that kind of the orangey, kind of pinkish hue, and the red wine casks, they can kind of steer the specific hue. But in terms of intensity of color, in terms of that kind of opacity of it, if you like, that pigmentation is really coming from oak itself rather than previous fill. And in this case, it's Oloroso style sherry, so it's oxidized, you know, white grape fortified wine. So it doesn't actually have which is used to season these casks for about 2 years. So the wine itself doesn't really have a strong color at all when it's being dumped out of the cask, right? It's sacrificial wine, by the way. It's a side note, but the wine is completely destroyed in the process of seasoning the cask as well. It's processed into.
Does none of it go into sherry vinegar or anything?
Yeah, sherry vinegar is a typical use, and actually Miguel has a vinegar processing plant on site, and you know, it's a running joke. He always says nobody ever made you know, a euro cent out of making vinegar, but it's just an exercise to kind of limit your.
So if you want to try you know, support the whiskey and sherry industry, folks, buy sherry vinegar instead of wine or malt vinegar, like, you know, that's.
Yeah, that's correct. And also, I would say you're probably more directly supporting the making of sherry casks by buying sherry vinegar over sherry, you know.
Yeah, well, this is my old boss used to always say he was a big sherry fan, and we sold a lot of sherry in an old job I had, and I love sherry, but he would always say, oh, you have to drink sherry because it supports, you know, the good whiskey, and we were like, no, it doesn't. Yeah, no, it doesn't. But still, drink sherry anyway because it's lovely. Jamie's in the chat said that I would recommend a visit to the Speyside Cooperage. Great to watch very skillful workforce in action. 100% it's phenomenal. Standing on that viewing platform and seeing the lads put together barrels at speed it's an amazing skill. And you know, we're talking about these casks. I mean, the story behind why we have fortified wines and the need to transport, you know, wines into the New World and over, you know, is an amazing history. But the shape, you're talking about the shape of the casks. These cask shapes go back 3,000 years. Like, you know, it's you know, they unearthed our pre-Roman archaeological sites with casks that are the same shape as something recognizable to what we use today. So coopering is an amazing skill in industry. So if you are in Speyside, I would have the Speyside Cooperage as high on your list of priorities to visit as any distillery in the area. Melvin says they got orange, plums, and ginger. We'll be getting one of these to go with my next Christmas meal at home. Well, Melvin, you'll be getting 15% off if you buy it after this tasting. I'll just tell you the price there. 1 second. The Balblair 18 is 134, and that's before the discount. James says if you're saying with every purchase of Balblair, you now get a free 500ml bottle of sherry vinegar. you know, I mean, what's sherry vinegar? It's like 86 pence or something in you know, in the supermarket. Can't
Yeah,
be much
yeah.
more than that.
Only
So
slightly less expensive than actual sherry, you know?
yeah, what we could do is we sometimes, we haven't obviously on tonight, so we only do it occasionally, but people listening will know that we often do a gift with purchase with these tasting packs. So that could be, we could do a gift with purchase of a sherry vinegar with
Yeah.
each tasting pack. The James is only £10 to visit, and you get a dram in the bargain. So yeah, no, Space on Cooperage is great. Will we move on to the next slide, Lucas?
Yeah, 100%. I don't have much left. The only thing that I really kind of wanted to talk about is beyond distillation, which just for those of you who are kind of watching the numbers here, the average receiver strength will be a kind of 68 to 69 thereabouts. Okay, so it's not particularly high, and we actually fill at receiver strength. Okay, so we don't drop the strength prior to filling into cask. In terms of maturation, it's 100% dunnage warehouse maturation for single malt, right? So we have the spirit maturing at our central facility in here in the central belt of Scotland in Airdrie, but all of the single malt is matured on site at the distillery, and it's just something about that really slow, very kind of even dunnage maturation. And these warehouses are split between sandstone and slate roof, and then brick and metal roof construction, but they're all open floor. Yeah, I've got a pretty picture of the boss, but I think this is kind of it when it comes to the slides. I don't have a slide for our last whiskey.
It's too new.
It's too new. It's too new. Yeah. So I haven't I failed to brief the agency to prepare a new slide for me yet. So I don't have a slide for it, but it's obviously a brand new product. You may be aware that we also have a sort of super uber premium 25-year-old out in the market, which is very expensive. Worth every penny. It's a product which is kind of aimed at a certain sort of obviously segment in the market, and there's very, very little of it. But we felt it's something was required in order to so for us to really showcase what the spirit does into the 20s, and to really showcase that intensity that it starts taking on in the 20s, but still keep it in a price point where it would be quite accessible to a wider group of whiskey drinkers, if you like. And you may think oh, I would never spend that on a bottle of whiskey, but we all know the rule of kind of death by 1,000 cuts. I remember when I first spent £100 on a bottle of whiskey of my own money, and I thought it was kind of the end of days, and that was probably 15 years ago. It escalated quickly.
Yeah, I still talk to my father about the in back in the 80s, whatever, when Ireland had the punt. He would always say in his local, there was places putting up a pint of Guinness to like 90 pence or something, and he was saying, the day they go over £1, I'm never drinking in a pub again, and now Guinness is like €6 or something. So it is, we change our tastes in life, but also things do get more expensive with time as well, and whiskey's a finite commodity in terms of age as well.
Yeah, correct. And I think at 21 years, it's own bottling from, wonderful kind of AAA distillery, if you like. Not in terms of size or kind of marketing budget or anything, but in terms of how it's regarded, and even within the industry between different distillers and among blenders, Balblair is sort of a name. It's a spirit to be reckoned with. It's a top dresser to end all top dressers due to that kind of really high sort of estuary, top end of it. The 21-year-old is further matured in those sherry casks, and this is extended further maturation. You will notice that I've been kind of, if you're paying attention to this, right, this kind of stuff, I've been shying away from the term finish, right? Obviously, it's not incorrect, but we like to say further maturation or second maturation.
Yeah, I'm glad you clarified that, because I thought you just had something against the Nordics, but
no, nothing against the Finnish people, no. I think the distinction for us, obviously, Scotch Whisky Association doesn't have a distinction between these processes. But the way that we like to think about it is a finish is something that takes, a spirit which is fully developed, which is ready, and puts a flourish on it, right? Adds a flavor. And a finish is something where probably the previous fill of the cask plays a role, a significant kind of discernible role, right? Perhaps even more so than the wood itself. Whereas further maturation or secondary maturation is a process where the spirit is really allowed to seep into the stave. And the normal process of that steep sort of uplift of extract is allowed to occur, and then it's allowed to plateau. So you're really going through that initial burst of sort of extraction, and then you're really kind of into the oxidation phase. And this is really, it's an important distinction, right? It creates a product which is extremely well integrated, and it feels like it was always meant to be that way, right? It doesn't feel like a product which is kind of which is altered. It feels like a fully integrated, very intentional, very kind of defined outcome of a sort of a premeditated process, if that makes sense at all. It's just sort of the way that we think about it, the way that we look at it, and also the outcome of that process is different to marrying casks, which went the distance in different cask types, right? So doing a 25-year-old, which consists of 20% sherry casks and 80% ex-bourbon casks, is a very different product to allowing all of that stock to mature in bourbon casks first for 80% of the time, and then doing extra 20% of the time in those sherry casks. So these are two very different processes. That's kind of, the latter would be sort of the modern way of doing things, where you fill everything into American oak initially, or near enough everything, right? Obviously, some people will fill into new make spirit, into Spanish oak, into sherry wood, into all sorts of things, but that's tip of the iceberg. There's very, very little. Whereas back in the day, sort of, well, back in the day, like it's kind of like it's hundreds of years ago, right? There's pre-1990s, let's call it this way. You would have been, everybody would have been filling, a proportion of their spirit into hogsheads, into production bots, into tired bots, into American oak bots, into all sorts of things, right?
Yeah.
Okay, but in this case, we have American oak casks initially. They are once again refill hogsheads, typically second and third refill. And they lend themselves very well to extended maturation periods. We tend to think of kind of, maybe first refill would have given kind of more of this. It's tool for the job, right? Is kind of how we look at it. If we were going to mature this for 7 years, and create something which would kind of sing at that age and really kind of hit that kind of stride and balance at that age, sure, we would have used first fill American oak, because we would have been relying on that extraction to really kind of lift much faster. But if we're going to hold this in American oak for 20 years ahead of refilling into Spanish oak, it's really the casks that are going to give the extract off at a much more flat rate. They're going to lend themselves well to this. And then the casks, again, the Spanish oak casks are the same type of Oloroso sherry butts that we discussed, but at this point, the extent of time that the spirit spends in the Oloroso sherry casks, in our mind, kind of justifies that additional kind of sub-name or subtitle to the whiskey, which is Balblair 21 years old Oloroso sherry cask, right? Because that's where it's really kind of gone those kind of 4, 5, 6 years, that full cycle in the Oloroso sherry casks, and it's really taken on the character of the previous spirit of kind of heavily oxidized wine, but also crucially a lot of that character from Spanish oak. Now we'll jump into your comments, and I think we can kind of discuss freely, but one thing that really strikes me about this is just how fresh and compact and really direct it is, right? If you look at the line drawn from 12 to 15 and then 15 to 18, you would have expected this to go along this way and just become this kind of quite sort of, chocolate sort of praline, very kind of broad, but kind of increasingly kind of dull at the top, right? The ceiling is getting lower and lower and lower. But actually, it doesn't do that at all, right? It still shines and it still jumps out of the glass with the top end of it, and it still maintains to hold incredible level of integrity despite that very aggressive kind of borderline abusive cask being employed for a long period of time. So that's why I love it, and and it's also absolutely delicious in my view.
No, it's an incredible whiskey, it really is. I've been looking forward to try this since it launched. I was actually saying to when we did the Old Putney tasting, saying to your colleague Stuart that there's so many whiskies come out that weekend, the end of September, with the whiskey show and stuff, and I suppose like films or albums dropping at busy periods, you can kind of get lost in the noise because there seems to be a new release every day in that period. But the new Old Putney Coastal series and this were two that had sort of been on my watch list, and I knew before then that we had these tastings coming up, and I was like, oh, really looking forward to that. And this is really good, and I think it's, as I would like to reiterate, was it Vicky's comment there where she says, wow, this tastes like all the best notes of the 12, 15 and 18 combined together, not that there are any bad ones. Bob says, wonderful nose, coconut and pineapple, creamy fudge, clove toffee, ripe fruits on the palate, quite tropical, pencil shavings and chocolate. I tasted the 25-year-old whiskey show, so tempting. And Ali said, oh, this is that's whiskey of the night, stunning. There's a couple of questions in there as well that we'll maybe come on to after I finish talking about this whiskey, but I just don't want to lose focus on the 21 right now. Jamie says, how come the 21-year-old is lighter than the 18? Mel says, coffee, cloves, toffee, wood spice, then finishing with chocolate, digestive biscuit, loving the 21, lovely body. Any thoughts on those comments there, Lucas?
Yeah, great comments. I think the sort of, again, the sense I'm getting is that kind of integration. It's continuity within a range, the intensity of it. I agree with all of that. Really good tasting notes as well.
What I'm loving about it, Lucas, is there's almost a contradiction or a hypocrisy within the whiskey where you get initially met on the palate with so many fruity notes, but then it's quite dry in the mouth.
Mm-hmm.
So your brain almost doesn't know what to do with. You're like, if I taste that, it should be a bit juicier and sweeter. And I think that's what I really enjoy about it, that it makes you think. It's one of those whiskeys, like a good film, it's forcing you to go, oh, what's going on there?
Yeah.
So no, it's a really fun whiskey.
Would you also agree that the 21 is probably closer to the 12-year-old than the 18-year-old is to the 12-year-old, right? In a way that it just projects, in a way that it has that kind of, at the top end, it just has that kind of almost sort of singular focus on that kind of, quite defined sort of group of those sort of spicy, citrusy, tropical notes. It's just great. It's just really good.
It is very good. Yeah. And it's as you mentioned the price earlier on, and it's £300. So you're getting 15% off that. So it's a chunky price, but it's a chunky discount as well. You get, folks, if you're thinking of treating yourself ahead of Christmas. It's one of those things where malts of this age are trending that way anyway, full stop, but at least this one actually does, as everyone will know. We try a lot of quite expensive drams on some of these tastings. I was thinking there was one on the Diageo tasting that we tried recently that was about 250 quid, and it was quite good. So there's this one really does, like, wow, it stands out from the lineup, I must say. So it's £45 off you're saving with a 15% discount, and because we're at the end of the tasting, this is the bit where I will come in with that 15% discount. So it's WS16 BB for Balblair. That was my logic in setting that one up. If anyone wants to look behind the curtain, so that will give you 15% off any of the whiskey you try tonight at checkout, and it's valid for 2 weeks. So fill your boots. We've got a couple of questions in there already, and normally, Lucas, at this point of the night, we start asking people what their order of preference is. So we want to start getting that in the chat before we go to the two kind of other questions in the chat that have already been asked. Do you have any final thoughts on this 21-year-old?
Myself?
Well, on either it itself or on what's been said so far.
Yeah, I'm kind of scanning through some of the comments. And I love them. I think you guys have got it. I think there's a with these sort of drams. I think there is a risk of over talking on my part. Because this is an experience, and I also don't want to kind of over go over this territory too many times and kind of spoil it for you. But I'm tracking the comments, and this kind of that kind of coffee note kind of came out a couple of times, which is quite a kind of like a soft tannic note, I guess. Some really good stuff. And coconut, which is kind of high quality American oak note. Typically, pineapple is integral to the spirit itself. And as I mentioned, it will actually tend to get more pronounced and more ripe, and eventually kind of like decaying in older expressions as well. So yeah, very good.
In terms of the earlier questions that were asked, so Jeff said, is Balblair bottled by the distillery? Was it also used in blends? I know that I read actually in getting ready for this tasting, I think it's 15% of what's produced ends up as under the Balblair label. So what happens with the rest of it?
Oh Jesus, I think that 15% is probably more in a sense of what we actually lay down at the moment. But in terms of the stock profile, it's even less than that, right? So Balblair used to be owned by Allied Distillers, and we got it in mid-1990s. So it goes into all of our blends, but actually still goes into blends owned by other people. So we still have kind of deals in place where we trade the spirit for other spirit, or we sell it. So most of Balblair goes into blends, as is the case for most distilleries, even famous distilleries. You wouldn't think that, but yeah, most of it goes into blends and is traded with other distillers and other companies, or we lay it down ourselves.
Excellent. And Jamie's asked, do you have any exclusive distillery exclusive offerings if you visit the distillery for tasting or to buy?
Sorry, say it again. I was
just basically when you visit distilleries, there are distillery exclusives to buy or to taste.
Yeah. There's a handfill at the distillery. That's kind of set up most of the time.
So you have to walk away with it like this.
Yeah, almost. Yeah. So you fill your own bottle by hand, and you kind of you put the seal on it, and the distillery manager can sign it for you, so you can fill your own, which is always a delicious kind of very active ex-bourbon cask. Typically, the team picks. If you're going there to very specifically for the hand fill, I would give them a ring in advance, because very occasionally they'll be kind of in between casks or whatever the case may be. But kind of 99% of the time there will be a cask set up that you can fill from.
And Devin Ross, has any idea how to pronounce Clachbierach?
Actually, you're spot on. Clachbierach is kind of the pronunciation I keep hearing from people who are kind of much better at this than I. I'm not a Gaelic speaker. It means sharp stone, but Clachbierach is kind of the way that we say it internally.
Very good. Gavin says, love the finish on 21. Are there any prospects for a portwood or rum cask finish in the Balblair whiskies?
Oh, Jesus. So port or rum, both of those cask types are already filled, and we're kind of looking at monitoring. But we've always got stuff, we've always got stuff that's kind of filled and being looked at. It doesn't mean it will become a commercial product. But it's being looked at. I think something about Balblair is kind of it's quite precious. It's like this little kind of jewel box, right? And everything that comes out of it has to be kind of perfect. And it commands that kind of slightly higher price point, just because there's so little of it, and everything that we do is just creme de la creme. It's just perfection. It's such a kind of narrow, slither of the stock profile. It's really genuinely hand selected. I think in terms of casks, not just the ones that you mentioned, but other, I would call them kind of specialty casks or non-standard casks are in the pipeline. What I mean by pipeline is maturing, right? So yeah, I would say watch the space, but that's just not the Balblair way, is it? It's kind of it's ready when it's ready. I know it's an annoying thing to say, but that's kind of the reality of it. But it's, you know, we're not kind of we're not resting on laurels. We're not kind of docile about it. We're not kind of, you know, indifferent to these trends or to the demand for these things. But we have to make sure that those things are 100% on the money, kind of 10 out of 10, and also within what we perceive to be kind of the stylistic bracket for a Balblair single malt. Yeah. But, which is a very roundabout way of saying yes, yeah, these things are coming.
Brilliant. I was just catching my bearings there. Sorry, absolute brain fart moment. I suppose I have my own question before we run down people's winners and losers for tonight. Was this bottle shape you mentioned? It was when you said jewelry box and that, in terms of how you pick your thing. It's even, you know, even within unique whiskies, it's a unique shape. Could you maybe just touch on that for a second?
Yeah, so the shape was first introduced in 2008, and it's supposed to resemble a pebble stone from a stream that's been kind of smoothed over by time, which I think is quite lovely.
Brilliant. Excellent. Now I've so what we can see here is you've got the 21-year-old is I think the winner, but not as clear as I thought it would be, having tasted it myself. There's a few people in there with the 18, and then I think maybe one person has said or two people have said the 15. So yeah, it's quite an eclectic mix, which as I always mention when it's an eclectic mix in the end, this is always a good sign on the range, because I actually thought the 21-year-old was going to run away with it. Bob says, loved all four, but based on price as well as taste, I would go for 18, 21, 15, 12. Hope Santa lets me have the 21 though. Thanks for including with this very good tasting. Well, thank you for attending, Bob. And Catherine says 18 for both Dan and myself, so thank you, Catherine. There's a few more 18s coming in there as well from Neil and Corey, so the 18s kind of creeping up there as well. So it's really interesting. Any parting thoughts, Lucas, before we finish off with it tonight?
No thoughts, just gratitude, really. Thank you for drinking all of my whiskey, and for all the kind comments and excellent tasting notes. And it's a pleasure, you know. It's we are like-minded people, and we like the same things, and kind of time and time again, I'm proven kind of, you know, this point is proven to me, you know. We try our best to make sort of the best single malt possible, and it's just such a delightful, you know, moment for us when we get this sort of feedback and people enjoy the spirit. So yeah, thank you very much for joining, and yeah, I'm glad you enjoy the whiskey.
No, thank you, Lucas. It's been incredibly informative and well paced tonight. I really appreciate you coming on. I appreciate everyone who's watching us live or the recording. We love doing these digital drams. So you know, the more you attend, the more we can do. So that's brilliant. So thank you everyone who purchased a pack and who joined us tonight. There's some lovely comments coming in there. James, it's been a great night. Love the facts and the info throughout the slides. Love to geek out and stuff like that. So well, thank you, James. So do we. Dob says thanks, Lucas. Really great tasting explanation of the distillery. So it's brilliant. So thank you everyone for joining us. We'll leave you there. We have another tasting going on sale early next week. So keep an eye out for that. And I'm trying to squeeze in 3 more before Christmas. But we're just gonna try and align time wise with Black Friday and things happening. It's difficult to get the things organized in terms of with our on-site bottling hall and stuff, but we've already got a packed schedule for January, February and March. This is the most 2024 calendar for Digital Drams is probably really full. It's way fuller than it's been for the last 2 years. So brands are seeing feedback from you guys and seeing the impact of these and really want to get involved. So that's great. So there'll be a lot happening in 2024. So yeah, tell a friend to join the W Club. The discount code is WS16BB for anyone who missed it. B for Benjamin and B for Button. So Lucas, thank you for joining us. And I hope you have a great night. Maybe we'll get you on again soon for another tasting. Or, well, you know, it'd be great to have you on again soon for another tasting. Sorry, get you on makes it sound like it was your privilege, but trust me, it was ours.
No, it'd be my pleasure. Thank you again for having me.
Brilliant. Thanks again, everyone. And we'll talk soon. Have a great weekend.